Hello everybody. We're here for one of the MMRA informational videos. Today we're going to rebuild this Tanner Gen 2 shock. So we're going to completely disassemble and reassemble the shock. Some of the things that you may need to get before you rebuild your shock is you can buy this complete rebuild kit from Tanner Shocks from Mittler Brothers. You'll also need some of these tools. You'll need a drip cup that they have, the spanner wrench, some various Allen wrenches. Then you'll need some form of device to grip the shock. I have this homemade tool that I like. Tanner sells this product here that you can clamp the shock in, or you can simply just get two pieces of wood, bore the center out to make it fit the contour of the shock, and clamp that into a vise also. So okay, we're going to start here. The first thing you need to do is take the valve core cap off. We're going to remove the valve core to take any air pressure that's in the shock so that it doesn't shoot oil out in the next step. So we're going to make a pile here of all the used parts. The next step is to take the bleed screw out of the top of the shock. I normally push the shock rod all the way down. So next we're going to take our drip cup, put that there so we can prevent oil from running down the shock. Now this is on normally pretty tight, so you got to give it a good hit with your hand to break it loose. You're going to unwind that all the way up. So now what you want to do is grab a hold of the shock rod and the closure nut and kind of wiggle it up. Allow the oil to drain. Okay. And we're going to lock this into the other part of the shock vise. So you'll need a 7/16 wrench in order to take the nut off of the bottom of the shaft. We're going to pull the valve assembly off. Now the Tanner Gen 2 shock, it's one of the simpler shocks out there to rebuild. So that's kind of nice. This is your piston. You have a washer on the top and bottom side. And then we'll take the closure nut off. So the next thing we're going to do is there is a seal, that white seal there. We're going to take that seal out and replace that seal. That's going to be the first thing we're going to do. So we're going to take shock vise out. Prop that up. Well, actually, we're gonna drain that oil out so we don't make a mess. And what I normally do is get a paper towel, shove a paper towel in there so that it can absorb the oil. We're going to push that off to the side. So you have an Allen screw here. So you need to take that Allen screw out. Place that off to the side. We're going to reuse that. The other thing you can do is this O-ring here is going to be replaced. So you can just pop that out, throw that into the pile. So I have this little aluminum piece here. It's just the end of a broken radius rod that I've found to use. First thing you want to do is get a screwdriver, and we want to pop the old seal out. Get that out of the way. And then we're going to place that inside there. You want to get a wrench or something that you can catch the outside, and we don't want to break that bushing that's going to push out. So we do this in order to get the seal back in. You can pull the seal out through the top, but when you push it back in through the top, it deforms it some, and I'm just not really fond of doing it that way. I'd rather just pop this bushing out real quick. So most people say that you need to replace that bushing every time you do that, but I found that you don't necessarily have to do that. So we're going to get a paper towel, just kind of clean it up inside there. If it's really dirty, you might want to use some brake clean, but this shock is in, you know, pretty good shape. It's pretty clean. So we're going to open up our kit. Make sure you don't get your new and your used parts mixed up. So we're going to grab the new seal. Just shove it down in there. You might need to get a screwdriver in order to pop it into place. You'll hear it click into place. So now what I like to do is this, to make this more usable, I get a file and I lightly file this bushing down. I don't want to file it down too much, but what I want to do is just so that I can push the bushing back in with my fingers, so that when I rebuild the shock again, it's easier. The one thing you want to do is you want to check the bushing to make sure that there's not too much slop in between the bushing and the shaft. So in order to do that, you just get your shock rod, push your bushing on there, and check the play. There'll be some play back and forth, but as long as it's not too excessive, you should be good. So let's see here. See how that just slides back in there? So that's what we want it to do. We just gotta get that to twist a little bit. Give me a second here. There we go. Nice back in place. We're going to get our screw, reuse our screw again. Get that started, wind it in. Get the Allen wrench. Okay, snug that up. And we need to come in here and get the new O-ring. Make sure we remember to put the O-ring back on there. Slide it on up. So, okay, we're all set there. Now, the next part we're going to do is there is they call it a floating piston down in this cap here. So we need to break this, the cap off of the body of the shock. So we're going to take the spring perch off. We're going to use the tool that I prefer to use here. Spin that on. So that cap is threaded on, and normally it's pretty snug. So I like this because I can really get a good grip on the shock body in order to break it loose. So we're going to spin that all the way down to the bottom. And this is held together with two Allen head screws. Let's try. Open up the vise. We're going to again clamp that in pretty tight. Oops, sorry about that, guys. Okay, now get an adjustable wrench. We're going to put it on the end of the shock. We got to make sure we don't hurt that bushing at all. There we go. Now you can see that there's some Loctite in there. So we're going to get a little toothbrush and just try and clean that out before we open the shock up and get that all inside the shock. Okay, no oil there. Okay, the next step is to get a small screwdriver, and there's an O-ring inside there. So we need to pop that O-ring out so that that black piece, that's the floating piston. So we pull that O-ring out so we can pop that floating piston out. So the easiest way that I found to do this is to get some air, get a paper towel, kind of cover the top a little bit, face it away from you so again you don't take a bath in the oil, and you're going to spray the air into the air port. And it pops that piston out nice and easy. Okay. So now you can see here that there's oil on the other side of the piston. That means that this O-ring was bad and it was leaking oil past. So it's a good thing we did this. So get your screwdriver again. You're going to pop the O-ring off of the piston. Now you can, if you have a parts cleaner or brake clean or something like that, you're more than welcome to clean the parts up. I typically just get a paper towel really good. You want a little oil on this anyway for the O-ring to slide up and down anyway. So clean your piston up really good. You're going to get the thickest O-ring that's in there. You're going to slide that back on. Then get a paper towel. You want to clean all that old oil out of there, because again, this is an air chamber here, so we don't want that oil down in there. Okay. Okay, we're nice and clean now. So what we're going to do is get our piston. You want the pocket to be facing up. You press that all the way in. Then, I think I cleaned it off a little too well. I'm going to get a little shock oil here. Kind of lube that up a little bit. Okay, so that's in there good. Now that other O-ring that we pulled out, this needs to fit down into that groove below the threads. This one can be a little bit of a pain to get in there. I'm sure they'll edit all of this out for you, and it'll look real nice and easy. So, okay, so that O-ring's in there. We can pull the paper towel out that we were using before, and then we're ready to screw this back on. Now, the key here is when you rebuild this Tanner shock, even if you just replace a shock rod, you need to make sure that that floating piston is all the way to the bottom. Okay, we're going to screw that back on. We're going to get our adjustable. Tighten that pretty good. Okay, we're finished with this clamp now. Okay, we'll put the shock vise back in. We'll put the shock back in there. Even this out a little bit. So one thing you may want to do is check and make sure your rod is straight. So what you might want to do is pull the rod off and just roll it on a flat surface. So, but we know our shock rod is good here, so we're going to continue on. So this rubber O-ring here, they use it as kind of like a bump stop inside the shock. So what I normally do is I put the new one on. So you can use that as a ride indicator to find out how much, or a travel indicator to find out how much travel you have. And then you put your closure nut back on. And then I use this one, the old one, and I put it back in as that bump stop on the inside. So now these washers here, you have to be very careful of these washers. It might be very hard to see in the video, but the one side is kind of rounded and the other side is nice and flat. So you want the flat side to go up against the piston and on both sides. It helps keeps your forces more consistent. So here's our piston. It's a number 3 shock. It has a 3 stamped on the piston. If you buy a master rebuild kit, they actually give you these new bands. So, but this general rebuild kit does not have that. So you just slide that back on. Again, your washer has a rounded side and a flat side. So the flat side goes up against the piston. And then your nut. Get your 7/16 inch wrench. Snug that up good. The next step is we're going to fill this up with oil. So typically there's threads on the inside. So you want to fill it just to the bottom of those threads. Okay. So this is Tanner shock oil. Okay. So as you can see, it's filled just to the bottom of those threads. So now this is the critical part. So what you want to do is put the piston in on an angle and work it in there, and you want to leave the shock extended pretty much most of the way. Let's put our drip cup back on because we're going to make a little bit of a mess here. So then you want to tighten down on the closure nut. And we're going to lock this down nice and tight. Now this procedure here will work for a Tanner Gen 2, Gen 3, Platinum 4, or the Vision shock, how you bleed the shock. So again, the floating piston is pushed all the way down. We're full of oil. Closure nut with the rod out as much as we can, or as close to as much as we can get it. So now we're going to push the rod in, and you're going to see oil coming out of the bleed hole. Sometimes you'll see some air bubbles. That's what we're trying to do, is get the air bubbles out. In the kit, they give us a new bleed screw. So we're going to put the bleed screw in. Okay, you want to tighten that bleed screw up all the way. So what we have here is just an air hose that has a regulator on it. So initially what we're going to do is we are going to charge the shock up with high pressure. We're going to put the valve core back in it. So you want to make sure this step here, you when you fill it up with air, you want the shock rod to fully come out of the shock. So you're going to see it come all the way out. Verify the shock rod is fully extended. We're going to bleed that air off. Then we're going to lower the air pressure down, and we're going to fill the shock up to 20 psi. So we're going to adjust the gauge. Want to release and hit it a couple times just to verify you get the 20 psi in there. And we should be complete. We're going to put the cap back on. Now what you want to verify is when you're all done. So you want to push the shock in and out. You might hear some air bubbles, but they should work their way out. And then the Tanner shock, typically the rod will start working its way back out again slowly. So that's how to rebuild a Tanner Gen 2 shock.